Welcome back, everybody. This is Darreck Kirby, and this is the Kirby Create podcast. This is a particularly interesting guest we have here today. This is Ari Temkin from 105.3 The Fan. You may recognize him as the voice of the Cowboys pregame and postgame shows with the flagship station. Ari, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Darreck. How are you, buddy?
I'm pretty good. Just staying busy, juggling a million things at once. But you know, I'd be bored if I didn't have a million things going on, probably. So I think it's probably for the best.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the time to be juggling a million things, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
At this age.
Yeah, it definitely helps, I guess, having a little bit of the energy on that front. But yeah, it's a little bit challenging working in the now about to be 9-month-old daughter as well.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Ridiculously challenging.
Oh, yeah. It's brutal. I mean, she's got 4 teeth that have come through, like all within a week. And so, I mean, obviously, if you got 4 coming through at once and they're your first teeth, you can imagine the sleepless nights. And like doing that while juggling like midterm projects and things for school was just brutal. But it's working out. She's doing a little bit better now that she had that initial few teeth come through. So I've slept a little better lately and I feel about 70% is the battery, I'd say now. I was working in the low 20s for about a week or so there, I felt.
Yeah, having kids will test every skill and function that you have, you know, it will really test everything about you.
Yeah.
You know, and the way I describe it to people, because it's funny, because it's like, you know, I have friends that are about to have their first kid or whatever. And, you know, so it's like, it's one of those things where it's like when you were in that position, you knew something was coming, but you didn't know what or how, or, you know, you didn't really know to what extent. So the way I always look at it is I say, look, I mean, in your life, you get to be as selfish as you want to be. You can wake up when you want, you can go to sleep when you want, you know, you can be selfless, but you are, whenever you want, able to be selfish. When you have a kid, you can no longer do that. You now have to be selfless when you don't want to. You have to be selfless with your money. You have to be selfless with your time. You have to be selfless with your sleep, and you don't have a choice there. It's thrust upon you. Whereas you can be selfless whenever you want before you have kids. In this case, it just forces you to be selfless all the time, particularly at times you don't want to be, like, you know, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, for sure. And that sounds like a ringing endorsement against having a child almost, but yeah, she's a handful.
But there's a reason we have them, you know, there's a reason we have them. There are positives of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's amazing. It's amazing and horrible at the same time. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's amazing and horrible at the same time, for sure. Because there's definitely times where you're like, oh my God, I got to get up again to like hand her back her pacifier or something, which she spit out 2 hours ago and was fine with, but now it's the end of the world that she doesn't have it. Like stuff like that. You're like, all right, fine. But yeah, it's pretty great. It's something that, I mean, obviously now with her being 9 months old, I've had time to adapt. And every time I feel like I'm starting to figure things out, I swear the routine just changes. There's some like developmental milestone or something she hits, or some new phase or something, where one of the other recent things was, I guess she reached the milestone where she's got separation anxiety now. She's like, it's like object permanence or something. She's aware of when we leave the room, and she now knows that our room is like across the house, just with the floor plan and everything. And so like, that's the worst thing. You can be laying her down in her crib, practically falling asleep, but the second she realizes you're out of the room, she knows, I guess, where you must be, and that's too far away. So it's challenging. I'm like, well, we can't exactly build a new room in the house, so we're just gonna have to work through this phase. But
it is it's the most common misconception about parenting is that you raise the kids.
Yeah,
they raise you.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway, other than that, managing just fine, getting through school and work and everything else on my plate, still doing a lot of stuff with Dallas prospect and all of that, which, you know, that's a continual grind in its own right. It's like having 2 jobs, school and a child, all to manage at once. But you stay busy as well. Obviously, you're no stranger to that. You've got 2 or 3 kids now. 3?
2 kids.
2. Okay.
3 jobs.
That's where I flipped it. That's okay. Yeah. So in addition to your gig,
And I will only have 2 kids, by the way.
Yes.
Two and done. That's it.
Yeah, that's good.
There will be no
that's
more.
Smart. That's smart. I've had the one, and I feel like I've had my fill. But but in addition to your gig with the Fan, you work with Sirius XM as well, doing college football talk, correct?
Yeah, I host on Big 12 Radio, channel 375. I do a 3-hour talk show in the mornings, and it's college sports, Big 12 in particular. And then also some work on ESPNU radio as well, part of Sirius XM channel 84. So a lot of college. And then in addition to that, I work for a podcast, vidcast, influencer network called CLNS Media, where I do strategic partnerships and sales and everything under the sun, basically. So, yeah, man, you just got to stay busy, and, you have 2 kids, you really got to up the income. So it's like,
yeah, I'm stressing about one. I can't imagine having a couple. Yeah, but, well, that's cool. And, I know before we had worked previously, kind of collaborated together and all of that back with Phantom and all of that. Is Phantom still around, or is it just not in the Dallas market specifically at this point?
Yeah. So Phantom exists now as a company called Catapult. It became different, and there was no longer a need for content. And so that was, really my role, and went more into the ad tech space. And so, basically my role with CLNS Media is kind of an extension of what I was doing with Phantom.
Okay.
And recruiting and strategic partnerships in particular. But yeah, we got in touch, through that, and you introduced me to some cool people. RJ Young, one of them, who's now up to huge things. So
he's done quite well.
It's pretty cool. I mean, when you introduced us, he was just a OU YouTuber, which is not just it's a very difficult thing to do to get to that level. But, then he grew through a weekend radio show to a daily radio show to now being on Fox, Fox Sports, and part of that college football group, which guy's insanely talented. I knew from when I first met him that he would go far because of how good he is. So
he's got a ton of charisma, that's for sure. And his work ethic is unreal. Like even just kind of like, because like I know RJ, but like I'm not like close with RJ or anything like that. But like even just the kind of one step off from him that I could kind of see everything he was doing. I mean, he was juggling like his PhD and like daily content, like multiple videos a day and everything, with all this other stuff. It's just incredible. Like he was releasing like a graphic novel he wrote during that time. I'm like, how do you do everything that I want to do like all at once? No,
all at once.
It's almost unfair, but I don't know. At some point, I imagine he's got to sleep, but his work ethic is unreal, and his rise has been incredible to watch for sure.
I'd say it's partly like so much of it is just organization. That's where I struggle the most. Is like I'd love to work at peak efficiency. The problem is I can't organize myself well enough to work at peak efficiency, and I feel like the people that do that, and I don't know that RJ does. I'm just
speculating.
Perhaps he does. Yeah, speculating here, but that's what it's about. It's there's enough hours in the day to accomplish what you want to get done, as long as you plot it out in a way that makes it so.
Yeah.
I just don't do that. I would like to. I just don't do it.
I certainly try. I certainly have several things on the to-do list, and try as I might, whether I try like time blocking or whatever other thing like that, there's always like 2 or 3 things that I'm like, all right, I need to get this done today. And then it's like 3 days later, and I'm like, dang it. Like, I still haven't done that yet. Like, obviously if it's like school, I can prioritize like that, but like a piece of content or something I want to do, whether it's scheduling a particular interview thing for the podcast or, different journalism related stuff I've been trying to kind of do to build out my portfolio on that front, just to have it as a skill set. There's been times I've wanted to like head out into Dallas and like cover a story about like a local business or something and how it was impacted by the storm. And like, I get to it, but I'm like, I feel like I was still a touch slow on when I needed to get to this, just because of how my schedule lays out. If I had done this earlier, I probably could have had better traffic and traction with the story, because I think at that point it was already like a week and a half after like everything had happened. But basically in that case, it was the store was doing repairs based on flooding that occurred. And they basically, until they were done and open to the public, they didn't want to comment on it or something to that effect. But there's just different things like that where it's like, yeah, I want to do this and I'm going to make time for it. And then you find yourself looking at it like, that would have been better if I had managed to do that. But it's definitely impressive, the people that can juggle all of the things at once. It seems like I don't know. If I have less than 6 hours of sleep, I don't function the following day. Like I can drink all the coffee in the world, I am still going to be half zombie through majority of the day. It seems like
you probably don't want to get less than 6 hours.
Yeah.
You know, like I think I
tell Harper that, but she doesn't listen.
Oh yeah. Well that's going to take some time.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, when you like look at studies and medical journals and stuff, it's like so much of everything in your life is tied to sleep, you know, consistent sleep. And there's no like, you have to sleep this many hours a day. It's more like you get into a rhythm of sleeping a certain amount. That's the amount you should sleep. If you sleep 6 hours, then you get 6 hours. If you sleep 7 hours, you get 7 hours, that kind of thing. And if you consistently sleeping 6 hours and you sleep 8 hours one day, you're actually worse off. You're worse off getting more sleep than you are less sleep. It's really interesting. And I say that all as somebody that probably gets between 5 and 6 hours of sleep every night. Sometimes more, closer to 5.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, sleep is definitely key in that regard. And whatever you function with, there are people I do know who can function with like maybe 6 hours of sleep and do it well. I'm just not among them. One thing that having my daughter has forced me to get better at, I was never a morning person. Never could do it. And now there's just no option. There's no hitting the snooze button because she beats the alarm in terms of when she's awake and, you know, calling you in there. And you're just like, okay. All right.
The piercing screams of a 9-month-old. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It goes back to the selfless thing, right? Like, you know, you can be selfish when you're sleeping and hit that snooze, but when, you know, you can't snooze when there's a piercing 9-month-old screaming for you to get milk or something, you know?
Right.
No options there.
Right. And that's one of the other kind of challenging things that I've kind of found with that as well is trying to strike that balance between, because like obviously your top priority and responsibility is to your child, but there is that kind of balancing act that you have to find with still kind of making time for yourself and your own interests in that regard. That's something that it took me a good few months to even get a general hang on. Like just to kind of figure out how to do that where I could still do like consistently do Dallas Prospect and do this other stuff while working with her. Now, obviously pandemic didn't help things, lockdown, quarantine, because she was born in June. So, I mean, it was like 3 months into the thing. And that definitely presented certain challenges in that regard. And then we had to do our own quarantine thing for a couple of weeks. And so it was just 24/7. You're all under the one roof and you just have to ride it out. So that was very difficult to figure out, but I think I've kind of gotten it down now where I'm like, okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm in a little bit of, you know, it's a little hectic still, obviously, but like, I feel like I've got a general feel for this, for how I can do all these different things still with not dropping any of the balls that I'm juggling, if that makes sense. But
totally. No, I mean, and I think it's constantly something to sort of work on and evaluate. And, you know, I find myself, you know, so I'm working during the day and then I pick up my kids from school and it's like, it's just a couple hours after they're home from school before they go down for sleep. And yet, you know, it's like, I'm looking at my email, I'm looking at Twitter. So I'm constantly trying to tell myself, put your phone somewhere else, you know, don't be glued to your phone. And it's, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, it's just this constant trying to do that. But, you know, I think we all search for balance. You know, you're sort of always inundated with people telling you how hard they work. And, you know, you see these, you know, promotional materials about like, you know, working so hard to get what you want, those kinds of things. And it's important, but it's also important to have that, you know, have that balance. Otherwise, you know, you will, and I say balance for lack of a better way to put it, you know, there's balance even in 70-30, you know, there's balance even in 80-20, you know, but I think for me personally, it's like constantly trying to remind myself of, hey, these things can be addressed later on tonight or tomorrow.
Right.
And not, you know, and not sort of always, because like my fear is, and it's happening anyways, you know, like my kids see me so much just staring at my phone where it's like, you know, that shouldn't be okay.
Right.
It's like so naturalized to us, and yet it's not to them, and it is becoming, and it's such a difficult thing. I don't know.
Yeah. There is definitely a grind culture kind of thing that goes on where it's like, if you're not working insanely hard, if you're not basically like working yourself to the bone or halfway into the ground, you're not working or something. Like, it's a really weird thing where it's like, I understand.
Show me how hard you work.
Yeah. Like, you got 7 hours of sleep, you must not be working. Like, it's like, okay, it's one thing to say like you work really hard. It's another to feel like you have that balance where you actually have that energy to spend with like your family or your kids or whatever. Like, it's something where it's like there's a balancing act there, and it ranges person by person. I mean, hell, sometimes it just depends on, the given phase. Like I said early on with Harper and being new to fatherhood and everything, like I felt like I had no time for all those other things I wanted to do because I was exhausted. It's like, if I wasn't actively tending to her and, taking care of her, I was just wiped, and I felt like I didn't have a whole lot like of energy to really offer or anything. And then as she got older, it got a little bit easier, and it kind of just sort of fell into a routine. So for a while, I would have said like, oh, my working really hard was if I got one of these different things I'm trying to juggle done each week. But now it's able to open up a little bit more where it's kind of back to what it was before we had her, just in terms of being able to, manage so many different things all at once. So it's definitely an adjustment that's taken time to get used to, but that's just kind of the way it works with anything. So, but I'm curious on your gig with the Fan and the Cowboys pregame, postgame show and everything. You've been doing that for 3 years. I literally already did the 2-3 guessing game earlier and I was wrong. So I'm a little trepid now.
Yeah. I just finished up my 3rd season.
Okay. Yeah. So how has that been for you? Like, transitioning into that role, because that's I guess the biggest access role that you've had so far, like in the Dallas market. I know you were in San Antonio before and doing a lot of Spurs related stuff there and everything, but for as far as Dallas, like this has been like kind of your main gig. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I would say now Sirius XM is probably my main gig.
Okay.
Because it's I'm doing them five shows 5 days a week. And then, I'm also doing fill-in work on the weekends and at night on ESPNU. And I don't know, it's hard to classify what the main gig would be. Right. I mean, they all have their times. They all take, time commitments. I mean, the work I'm doing with CLNS Media is a huge piece of my day too. So it's, the Cowboys is obviously way more seasonal. It's going to take up a large proportion of my time in season more so than out of season. But yeah, I mean, I worked in Radio Missouri, and then, was able to get an opportunity in Austin, working for 104.9 The Horn in Austin for a couple of years. And that was sort of my first entry point into covering the Cowboys, and I always watched them from afar. I grew up in Chicago in the 90s, so I wasn't a huge Cowboys fan because they won all the time. And the Bears always lost. So, it was just not fun. And, and they were, not only did they win, but they were, loud and aggressive about it,
Right.
And so you have these sort of preconceived ideas about Tony Romo, because that was when I moved to Austin and Romo was the quarterback. And so you have all these sort of stereotypes about Romo that you just buy into because they're there, right? Like, he's not clutch, or he chokes, or that kind of stuff. And then, it was like, that was my first entry point to like, oh, okay, no, you watch the games, you're like, no, it's everything else. He's good. It's all like, there's nothing around him. There's really bad decision making. Like he's dragging them as close as he can get them to the finish line, but it's in spite of all these issues. And, it was like this great entry point into like the perception of the Cowboys from outside versus the perception of the Cowboys from those that watch them and cover them.
Yeah.
And, that was where my infatuation with the team began, because I do like the Cowboys, and I love covering them. I mean, they are without a doubt God's gift to sports talk radio.
Yeah. They're never dull. That's
always
for sure.
Relevant. Right. They're always relevant. They're never dull. So I was in Austin for a couple of years working at the Horn and, covering the Longhorns, but then, the Cowboys are so big in Austin and Dallas. So that was just such a huge piece to the content we talked about and the stuff we talked about. And then I moved to San Antonio after a couple of years in Austin where I was covering the Spurs. And again, the Cowboys is big in San Antonio as they are anywhere else. And so, more coverage there, would go to training camp, really, had a foundational understanding of the inner workings of the organization, had great contacts that I met that, gave me some good insights into the organization. And then, the thing that I did to put me in position to get the opportunity with Dallas was, I was constantly trying to get out of San Antonio to move up and to get a job, a better job at a bigger city, a bigger market. That was always my endeavor. And so, I reached out to a guy I knew in the industry, Gavin Spittle, the program director at the Fan, and was like, "Hey, how can I get to Dallas? What can I do to get to Dallas?" And so he said, "Why don't you start doing some fill-in work for us?" I was like, "Can I do that from San Antonio?" He was like, "No." Okay. So for a year, I drove. It worked out this way where I was basically like once a month for an entire year. I would drive out and host weekends on the Fan, and it's a 4 or 5 hour drive.
Yeah.
So, it was a pretty difficult commitment I was making, but I was committed to getting to a bigger market, committing to getting to Dallas. And so I wanted to show that commitment and I wanted to prove my ability. And so I bet on myself in that regard. I figured it was a lot of, it was a difficult in the now. And by the way, I had a 9-month-old at that point in time, who's now 5. And so, it was like the same kind of thing where it's like, I'm trying to manage that while also being fair to my family and that kind of thing. But basically in doing that for a year, Gavin, I think, had a lot of respect for me because of, one, my ability, but then 2, my commitment. Yeah. And, he really put me in position to potentially get a job in Houston, which I did not get. But, he did offer me then the opportunity to come do the Cowboys pregame and postgame show, which is not a full-time job. But it was just an opportunity big enough that I wanted, obviously, to pursue it and move to Dallas. And that's what I did. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that for a year that you were just doing the commute back and forth. That's interesting. I don't know how I would manage something like that now. That seems like a very difficult sell to the missus. that idea of like, all right, on weekends, once a month, I'm going to be gone for that weekend, working in another market so that hopefully we can make it work. And then I'm going to make us move there. Like, it worked out. So that's great. That's awesome that was able to bridge the gap for you there.
Well, Darreck, I mean, in my career, I bet on myself a couple of times. So I was in Missouri and I couldn't get out of small town Missouri because it's just difficult. You send resumes and tapes and stuff, and you're just not going to hear back from people. And I in San Antonio, I was a program director. So I saw the other side of it too. And just the difficulty of having an open job and getting, all these different markets you've never heard of, and you immediately don't put much credibility into them because of that. So I moved to Austin with my girlfriend at the time, wife now, without a job. And so I just, I waited tables. I did delivery. I was selling Quill office supplies door to door, wearing a suit in 115 degree heat in Texas, going door to door to offices, trying to do that. And, I just was hanging around at the radio station because I wanted to be there and I wanted to kind of show my face and, so over time, just being there and showing a commitment to the station, got my foot in the door enough to where it was like an opportunity presented itself and I was able to seize that opportunity. But I bet on myself because I didn't know if I was going to get a radio or not, but I just moved to a city without the job and started hanging out at the radio station. And that's how that led to a job. So, I think based on that history, my wife had sort of an expectation of, okay, he might be doing something that's out of the ordinary, a little crazy here, but there's opportunity in that. And so, it's not an easy decision to make. It's not an easy decision to do. But I would just always advise anybody in this industry to like do risky things, take, especially when you're younger, bet on yourself, those kinds of things, because you're just not going to get opportunities sitting around and sending out resumes and tapes. Like it's so difficult. You have to create that forward momentum for yourself.
Yeah, no, that's very true. So you mentioned earlier talking about Romo and everything with the Cowboys, how once you kind of got closer where you were able to kind of cover the team and see all that in Austin, you kind of saw that the national perspective didn't match up with kind of the reality of it in the games. That's been an ongoing thing for Dallas. It feels like for a long time, where even if they have certain pieces right, it's like the spotlight might be on the quarterback, whether that be Romo before or now Dak, but it's like the way that they get saddled with all of the blame, but very little, if ever, the credit for when things go right. It's very weird how that works. I feel like that's, in big markets, that's a major thing. Like, New York is a tough place for quarterbacks, Philadelphia as well. But like in Dallas, I feel like it's a weird thing where when Romo broke through in like 2014, and we're talking about like the last great year, obviously, for that era of the Cowboys, it was when he was throwing it less and they had Murray, the complimentary piece, but then it was kind of like shifting that attention a little bit off of Romo and more just onto like, oh, well, Murray was getting more MVP buzz than Romo that year. And so it's like, it changes, like shifts the attention, even though Romo was having a career year in his own right. And then now with Dak, you see him getting saddled with the blame for everything. Like, didn't matter what stats he was putting up before his, leg injury this past season. He was being blamed with, if they were down in a game, even if he rallied them all the way back and then defense fails to get a stop or something like that. Like the blame seems like it always goes there. And how, like, in the case of like people looking back at the last Romo years, it's like revisionist history. It's like, oh, well, Romo did everything he could. Like, it's really weird how that narrative changes and like morphs over time. But it seems like it's always intending to take some of the credit and shine away from the current quarterback, if that makes sense. What do you think?
Totally. I mean, I think the quarterback is always going to get, a substantial amount of the credit and a substantial amount of the blame. Quarterback is such an interesting position just in the psyche of the sports fan, because they're responsible for so much.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, good or bad, like there's this like idea of like, you've got to be knighted as a quarterback. Like, this guy can and cannot win a Super Bowl. And it's like, so that was like, that's the crux of the paying Dak conversation, right? Like, can he win you a Super Bowl? It's like, yeah, but like, you also need to have decent pieces on defense. You need to have decent pieces on offense. You need to have a little bit of luck. You need to have good coaching. Like, it's funny to me that it's like Aaron Rodgers is such a good quarterback and has been for so long. How many Super Bowls has he won? One. How many Super Bowls has he been to?
Is still one, or is there a second one I'm not thinking of?
One.
He's
been to one. He's won.
He's been to the NFC title game like
Russell
5
Wilson.
times. Yeah.
Russell Wilson, great quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
One. He's been to 2. He's won 1.
Yep.
Right. So like, why aren't those guys winning? If these guys are like above and beyond, like they could do anything to win games.
Drew Brees.
Why? Yeah. Drew Brees. Why haven't they won more?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, because of all of the other ingredients needed to win. Because in the particular year when they won, there was luck. There was, all these things that are like, we know in all sports exist. And yet we fail to understand in football. It's like always goes to the quarterback. Well, the quarterback can't do this. You can't win because this guy can't do this. And it's like, but all these other guys that we've already anointed as being great have just won once.
Yeah.
But they're great. Why haven't they won any other times?
It's
Tom
also
Brady's the only one that's different than here. And I like, that's why he's like the greatest of all time.
Right.
Like,
yeah. When you have more titles by yourself than any other franchise, that says quite a bit, but
that's quite a bit.
Yeah. It's weird as well. Like the argument of like, oh, well, you don't like obviously they've paid Dak now, but like the people that were saying like they didn't want to pay Dak or they didn't want to give him the long-term deal, whatever. And the perception on that being like, oh, well, he's not in that Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers category. Ergo, we don't want to invest in that. We'd rather go back to the mill and try and draft a quarterback or sign a veteran or something like that. And it's like, well, you saw how many more games you won with Andy Dalton. It didn't fix things. Like there were people like legitimately on even the national kind of circuit. I'm trying to remember who it was. Tony Dungy talking about how like the Dak injury might've been a blessing in disguise because they'll get back to the run and they'll do this. Like, you have not watched a single game this year if you think that's going to work. Like it's weird how this perception kind of works, that they think like, oh, well, obviously the quarterback is the problem here because they're trying to do this, or if they went and they tried to draft a guy, then it would work better because Dak's not in that upper echelon. Ergo, you just go back to the mill. Like, no. I feel like people have such a weird blank spot in their memory of the gap between Troy and Romo, like how brutal that stretch was of the quarterback carousel and everything. And it's like, no, you hit on gold in the 4th round and you didn't even mean to. You were like, it's not like it was just a nothing thrown out there pick, but it was your compensatory pick. It was the pick from, I think, letting DeMarco Murray walk. In fact, that was the Dak pick, if I'm not mistaken. But regardless, it's one of those things that it's like you have a more than good enough piece here, but if you can just fix or build around them in these other areas, which they're doing certainly with how they've constructed the offense on paper should be insanely good. And the offense wasn't the problem last year. So it's like, if they can just build a defense around them and let him actually do something, then maybe they'll finally go somewhere beyond the wild card weekend. Maybe they'll actually finally break through to a conference title game. If they don't, I don't think it's anything against the quarterback that they didn't. It's going to be something where they didn't get a key stop or they failed to execute in some small way, right? Maybe it's something as simple as throwing it back to the thing that keeps Romo from it that one time, the Dez catch thing, or earlier in that game, the DeMarco fumble. Like, sometimes there's just something weird or just out there
luck
that doesn't go your way and just keeps you away from it when you were good enough to get there. So
it's the Rodgers thing again. I mean, it is funny how it's like, oh man, he's not as good. Can he? The idea of Dak is, if you don't have this great offensive line, if you don't have great running game, you don't have great receivers, you don't have a great defense, can you still win? And it's like, I mean, I don't know. Aaron Rodgers has only won once. Like, that's the crazy thing, is it's like he won as good as Aaron Rodgers is. And Aaron Rodgers is a better quarterback than Dak Prescott. He's also 10 years older, right? So like, give Dak 10 years and we'll see. But like, he's only won one, and he's only been there once. That's the crazy thing. It's like, we have this idea of what this great quarterback looks like. And yet everybody's like, well, Dak's not that. And why? Because he hasn't won yet. He's only won one playoff game. It's like, but this guy has everything and all the tools. And even he needs help on defense, an offensive line, good wide receivers, a good running game. Like, it's just crazy that it's like this bizarro world where, well, Rodgers won one, so he's been anointed. Drew Brees has won one, so he's been anointed. And it's like, but what do those guys do every other year? Like, there's a reason that and I'm not trying to knock on those guys. It's more of like, there's a reason why they're not successful every year. And it has a lot to do with the supporting cast, but yet it's like Dak gets, and a lot of other quarterbacks get sort of a negative because of that, a lack of supporting cast.
The Big Ben comparison is an interesting one in particular because he's got 2 titles, but his stats in those Super Bowls are not good. Like, Hines Ward got Super Bowl MVP because his receiver threw a touchdown pass for him in that first one. The second one was the Santonio Holmes catch. So his touchdown, he does throw the winning touchdown, but that play, like, it's a great throw, great catch, but the Holmes catch is the part of it that people remember against the Cardinals. So it's impressive how, as long as you have that little denotation by your name that you've won a Super Bowl, you're like free of a lot of the criticism. Because if they lose those Super Bowls due to the Steelers,
it was everybody else.
Do what?
It was everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's not given that kind of free pass or whatever from that, where he's not hit as harshly on criticism and all of that. So it's definitely an interesting conversation there. Just kind of the way that quarterback it's given the biggest money and the biggest spotlight, but it's also given the harshest, most unreasonable criticism at times as well.
Can the Cowboys win a Super Bowl with Dak Prescott as their quarterback?
Can they? I think they can. Yeah. But I mean,
of course they can.
There's so much stuff that they got to put together.
Right. From what we've seen of Dak Prescott, like, how can anybody say no, they can't?
Right. I mean, even his rookie
it's things
year
outside of
Rodgers,
his control.
Yeah, even the rookie year against Rodgers, they're down 24-3, and he brings them back to a tie game with the ball, driving, and that drive unfortunately doesn't go anywhere. And then you get another one of those stupid Aaron Rodgers throws that sets up the game-winning field goal, which I think was still like a 47-yarder. So, like, yeah, that's luck right there. Like, you had to have the most ridiculous throw and catch beat you in that situation. But, that should have, I think for me, that was when I stopped questioning like that they were in good hands with Dak, like watching him mount that comeback on that stage. And that was his rookie year, like no experience in the playoffs or anything, going against one of the all-time greats, and pretty dueled him evenly until the end. So yeah, they can win. They can win one with Dak. It's just a matter of whether things break right, whether they build properly around him. I think they didn't do a good enough job taking advantage of all those years they had Dak on a rookie contract. I think
no question.
I mean, Stephen Jones he's kind of weirdly reluctant, I feel like, he doesn't want to do like Jerry would just throw money at problems, go sign big name free agents.
Totally.
And
splashy
Steven doesn't want to
trades.
do that, which it's like, there's got to be a middle ground though, because it can't be
Right.
like uber frugal in all these different ways. And they're like, all right, well, we're not going to go out and get it. Like when the Eagles finally won their Super Bowl, they went nuts that year in terms of like signing guys, making trades. Like they were active in it. And if they didn't make those moves, they wouldn't have won it that year, because the guys they brought in played a key role as their team was crippled by injuries, but it didn't matter. Like, meanwhile, the Cowboys, if they have Zeke miss a few games, it's, oh, well, you can't blame this season on Garrett or on whatever, like they didn't have Zeke for 4 games. Like, okay. And then like next year, like, oh, well, they had injuries. Well, other teams find ways to work through injuries. Like
the Cowboys are the only team in the NFL that deals with adversity. Apparently that's what we're led to believe.
Exactly.
They're the only team in the NFL that has to deal with injuries and key spots. And I mean, I think you're 100% correct. That there's a spectrum here, and Jerry's on one side and Steven's on the other side. And it's like, why can't there be a balance there? You want to build your team through the draft and then supplement areas you've missed in free agency. And the Cowboys have just not supplemented those areas. And going into the season last year, the thing holding them back was their defense. You could see it. They had a bad secondary, and then they lost one of the best corners in the league and didn't replace him with anything other than a young draft pick who's a good project in Trayvon Diggs. But it's like, you know how steep of a drop off you have between Byron Jones and Trayvon Diggs. And then everybody's like, well, but Cheeto, he's not with Chris Richard anymore. He'll be fine. It's like, yeah, his problem was technique. No, I mean, the problem is the way that the Cowboys have evaluated their draft picks and have not been willing to admit mistakes in those picks and therefore supplement those mistakes through free agency. And, I would say in general, Stephen Jones did a fantastic job, but that the jury's still out on him in terms of how good of a job has he done, because his results mirror the same as his dad. Right. It's a completely different approach. And yet we're still talking about the same issue. The Cowboys still have not been back to an NFC title game since their last Super Bowl. So Jerry's reckless spending and bad trades and salary cap hell and bad drafts didn't lead to a Super Bowl. Either has Stevens' frugality built to the draft. If you're going to truly be introspective about, if you're going to truly be introspective about why you haven't gotten back to an NFC title game, well, then you've made a mistake by not committing enough in free agency, especially in their philosophy on the back end of a defense. Yeah. And it's with regard to their spending in free agency that they have done with Steven kind of calling the shots. It's like they're shopping at the Dollar Tree most of the time. And it's like, you can't go bargain shopping in this case. Like I'm not saying go throw a Brandon Carr type contract out there like Jerry did. That was the last really big money free agency signing I remember Dallas really doing. But like, I'm not saying go do that, go pay, as Jerry called it, sticker price. But at the very least, don't go there and say like, oh, well, our move is going to be Gerald McCoy. Like I love Gerald McCoy, but there's so much wear on the tires. He couldn't even get through the first day of mini camp. Like, I mean, look at Dontari Poe, Clinton Dix. It's funny because I remember when they signed Clinton Dix and people were like so excited about it. It's like, people don't realize he's not better than Jeff Heath. Like, he's different, and so it's like people just he's a different name, and so people just got excited about it. You're right. I mean, you can hit in free agency at some of those guys, and the Cowboys have done a good job on that. The problem is like the rate of hitting is so much less. Yep. Where it's like you're gonna end up with guys like Poe and Clinton Dix, and it's like, yeah, you've spent in free agency, but you haven't really improved your team. And so, yeah, I mean, their approach to bargain bin shopping in free agency has been a disaster. Because you'll find a few guys here or there, you will, but for the most part, you need to be able to, solidify and shore up some of these holes you have in the back end of your defense. And it's like, look what they've done. They've thrown a couple of 6th round picks at safety and, some late to mid round picks on corner. And like the results are one of the worst secondaries in the NFL last year.
Yeah, no, for sure. So we'll see what they're able to do. Hopefully it'll get better now they've paid Dak. So that big storyline's finally kind of taken care of itself. And for the people who are like, oh, well, now Dak's going to be under a major microscope. He was under a microscope for anything anyway. Like, at least now he's got money. At least now he finally got paid his value. And people freak out about this every year, but I've been saying it for several years, like pretty much as long as I've been doing YouTube, pointing out like everyone freaking out about Dak's eventual contract. We'll get 2 years down the line and his money will look like nothing because of how just the market works. Everyone freaked out when Darreck Carr, not David, not his older brother, when Darreck Carr was making $25 million. And now that would be such an insane bargain at quarterback. And you had people back then saying like, Dak's not worth $25 million. Like, all right, keep playing around. You're going to pay him 40. Like it's ridiculous how they don't see through that lens. Like the Cowboys dragged their feet for 2 years, finally getting this deal done. And I know that there was things. Cowboys wanted it to be a 5-year deal. Dak wanted it to be 4. That would give a little bit more flexibility and kind of hold to that based on like when guys, I think in the first few rounds, those were 5-year deals. And so they had like a little bit of a buffer there. I get there was a reason behind that thinking, but it's like the Cowboys allowing it to drag out as long as it did. I would be very interested to know how much more the price went up just for them, like thinking they were playing hardball for 2 years when they were always going to pay the guy anyway.
I'd say you probably hit it on the head there. I'd say it probably went from about 25 million annually to what it ended up being. And it was going to continue to go up.
Wow. Yeah. That's the thing too, where you got to talk about also in the Steven discussion, like, is that a good way to build it? Like you messed around that long and if you knew you were keeping him, why not just keep him? You sprinted to the line to give Zeke a new deal. Why drag Dak through all that rigmarole? But anyway, it's always entertaining. Like you said, the Cowboys are God's gift to sports journalism, sports media, all that, because there's always something. Even in the years where they are really bad, like a 4-12 year, they're always going to be a circus that people are looking at, talking about. And there's always that, oh, next year they get this guy and, this guy comes back and, oh, it could be a Super Bowl team. It's a contender. We've been saying that so long. I'm 31 years old. I don't think they've been to the conference title since I was 5, 6.
Yeah. 90. What was the last Super Bowl?
Let's see, 95 season. So they would have played it in February 96.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's it. I was 6 years old when the Cowboys last did anything of real elite value, anything that would make them a model franchise. And it's like, it's every year though. It seems like every year they're convinced that they are contenders and ready to go. And they might be one of these years, but it's not going to be because like it was some destined thing. It's just going to be that things finally broke right for them. And they finally cobbled together a good enough complete team to make a run. But, we'll see. It's an interesting viewpoint looking from kind of how the Cowboys are managing things as we're talking about them thinking they're perpetual contenders. Occasionally they're right that they're a contender that year, but you look across the way to like what the Mavericks are doing and how, with them just finally getting Luka and KP, like that window is finally opened, but it also feels like there's like this kind of intense focus on it as well. Like they've been inconsistent at times playing up and down to the level of their competition. Like they've got ugly losses against some bad teams this year, but it's like, I think people fail to realize like that window's just opening. Like we're still talking about a guy that's in KP, like 25 years old still. I think he turns 26 soon, or he just did something like that. And Luka just turned 22. And so it's like, we're looking at that and we're acting like it's, oh, they got to hurry up and win something now, as if they were 33-year-old Dirk and what ended up being the title year, like it's weird how like quickly that has snapped into effect from like, oh, we're a perennial lottery team to we got to go do something now because time's ticking.
No, I mean, LeBron James didn't win a title, until he was late 20s, early 30s. And this is the greatest player we've seen since MJ. Mm-hmm. And it took him that long. Like there is a process that takes time. And I mean, there's no skipping steps. I mean, it's the one sport the NFL, the NBA is the one sport where it's pretty consistent across the board. Like it takes time to win titles. There's a process you have to go through. There's really no exception to this.
Yeah.
And if there is, it's the exception, not the rule. The rule is, I mean, you got to get to the playoffs, and then you got to go through the grind of playoff series. I mean, look at how good Giannis Antetokounmpo is, right?
Yeah.
Like Giannis has been this great player for a long time. How many titles has he won?
Right.
And look, I mean, sometimes it never happens for great players, but the key is, it's building something, getting continuity with your coaching staff, with players around them, and then, adjusting every year. But I mean, the truth, I think, is the Mavs probably have to add a player here. And you could argue whether or not that Porzingis can be the second best player on a championship team, or does he need to be the third best player on a championship team? But you're right. I mean, there's with the NBA, like there's got to be patience, because just look at every other example of this. Like you have to really go through the grind and the ringer of understanding how to play in the regular season versus how to play in the postseason. All those things. Like there is this experience matters in the NBA playoffs. It doesn't matter in other sports. It absolutely matters in the NBA.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I don't know. Like I look at how the Mavericks approach things, and I agree. There's probably, even though KP has had a, post All-Star break, a couple of, the games he has played in, he's played really well in those games. But the questions about if he can be your typical or your standard number 2 guy, I don't know about that, just because of the health thing. Even if it's not like a major thing, it seems like there's always something nagging, something that needs rest. And that is a major thing that has to be considered, because above all, what's the kind of cliche or whatever, the best ability is availability.
Yep,
exactly. So if you don't have him consistently, and obviously, it's really terrible luck what happened in the playoffs with him last year with the meniscus, because bubble KP was a monster. I couldn't remember anything quite like it. And the fact that he could be the second best player on your team during that, you had him and Luka throughout the bubble averaging like 30 and 10 apiece, was otherworldly. And so you're looking at that like, oh, what can they add in now? Like what star will come play with them? And now we're looking at it and I'm like, okay, so we still are kind of back to not quite knowing what we have in KP. And we're trying to figure out with the Mavericks approach, like, I'm now wondering if they're going to do much at the deadline, because now they've been on a run. They've gotten 11 wins in 14 games. And you could say that they basically flew the white flag in the OKC game, not playing Luka or KP. But they've really put things together finally. And it's like the first time they've had time to actually build some momentum after they got just ravaged by the health and safety protocols earlier in the year. Like it's really hard to kind of get a firm grasp on what this team is, but we see like when they play up to their ability, they can go win in Denver twice. And Denver was in the Western Finals last year. Denver's a really good team. I know they're like the 6th seed right now, but they're a really good team. The West is such a log jam anyway that you're separated from the 4 seed by like 4 games. You're separated from the 5 seed by like 2.5 games. I mean, it's right there. It's like right at the cusp anyway. So it's I don't know, Denver went up. It's Portland who dropped from 5 to 6. That's what I'm thinking of. Regardless, the point is it's a log jam. So it's like they've got time that they can crawl out of it, but we still don't quite know what they are. And I feel like because they're at least trending in this right direction now that the deadline's probably like 9 or 10 days out, I would not be surprised if they actually do something that a couple of weeks ago would have seemed unfathomable and basically largely hold pat. Maybe they look at something for a nice role player, but I don't see them making any big moves. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the trade deadline is a seller's market anyways, and it's more of like okay, we believe we're a title team, but what are we missing? So let's try to get that kind of player. And I mean, are the Mavs a title team at this point? I don't think so. I mean,
no, I don't
building
think
something. Right. So
NBA
they're not like
a
player away at this point.
NBA is one of those weird things where you can just get hot and be that team that year. Like last year, the Nuggets were almost that team. How many times did they come back from a 3-1 deficit in the playoffs? Twice. I mean, just weird stuff like that. But yeah, and Murray played absolutely out of his mind in that postseason. But it's a weird thing where it's like, yeah, it takes, there's a lot that goes into it, but you can just be that team or a guy gets hot and suddenly everything changes for a while. But I don't know. Sorry, I cut off your point.
No, I mean, I I would say the Mavericks are not currently a player away, you know, or at least a player that they could get at the trade deadline. So I would say hold pat, and you know, as you said, like let's get more time to develop with KP and Luka to see what we have, because that's, you know, I remember when KP first came here and it was like, oh, he was just going to close it out for the whole year, and it's like, man, that time together on the floor, like that's so instrumental for longevity and success. That it's like I didn't agree with the full shutdown. And, you know, I mean, I get it from a standpoint of like maintaining long-term health, but I also like think you're hurting yourself in terms of that chemistry and that consistency in terms of playing together. Yeah. So, I mean, and it still has been a grind to try to get that, but that's the key, you know, is, you know, you look at title teams that win multiple titles over multiple years. And it's like, there's a chemistry and a camaraderie there amongst the team that's like built up over years and years of playing together.
Yeah. And I think that is a good thing the Mavericks have looked to do the past couple of years. I think last offseason, not this past one, so before last year, they were, you know, they kept a lot of their guys. Their free agent moves, you know, they got Porzingis to sign the 5-year max contract, and they brought in Seth Curry. But other than that, it was really just re-signing their own guys. And they said they wanted to cultivate continuity within the team, because year to year, pretty much post-title, it had been pretty heavy turnover every single year, it seemed like. And so they were finally bringing in where they had the majority of their guys locked up for like 3 years, but on very agreeable contracts, like the Dorian Finney-Smith contract, the Maxi Kleber contract. Those are very, very high, like high payout for a very, very reasonable contract in that regard. So I like what they do in that regard. And I agree that they're probably not going to do anything big in the deadline, but I wonder, you know, this is a weird year too, right? Because you have the play-in that you didn't have in any year previous to this. And I think that it probably will be standard moving forward. But because of that, the playoff picture is wider. It's 7 through 10 as some form of play-in. Like, so I think it's like 7 versus 8. The winner of that game gets the 7 seed, and then 9 versus 10, the winner of that plays the loser of 7 versus 8 for the final playoff spot, I believe is how that works. And so with that, you're going to have, I got to think, a less active trade market, because you have teams that are probably, especially with how the West is such a logjam, everyone's going to be like, oh, I mean, to get back to a Cowboys term here, you just got to make the tournament. Like, you just got to get there, and it'll be different. I mean, it's different, obviously, with the NFL being single game series. It's not a series, but I don't know. I feel like it's not going to be as big and active of a market, because you almost have to have like a high value star type player on a team that just has no prayer of, you know, they got to be like somewhere in that 12, you know, basement basically of their conference to get moved. That, or the team just has to be like, it's not working, we're just going to go into a total rebuild. Otherwise, you're going to keep your guy, because the hardest thing to do is get a star player. So I don't know what the Mavericks will end up doing. I imagine they'll hold pat, but all the notion of like trading KP, it never made sense to me. His value was lower than it had ever been in his career. So why would you sell him for pennies on the dollar when his ceiling is still quite high? If he's right mentally and physically, he's an all NBA talent. So why would you sell him for pennies on the dollar just to get away from him? Like, that never made sense to me. That was like a weird, it felt manufactured, but then the Mavericks, to be honest, didn't do enough to really distance from it. I felt like they kind of leaned into it where like, oh, he's missing 3 games for back tightness. And they'd say like, oh no, there's nothing to it. But like, I don't know. There was something about how they handled it. It didn't feel like enough of a full-throated denial, where it's like, it seemed like at the very least they were kicking tires maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, it's such a difficult situation, because you feel like you have this guy that you could build on along with Luka to build something long term here. And then there's, you know, then there seems to be evidence to the contrary, or you talk yourself out of it. So, I mean, I look, I believe in KP. I believe in KP and Luka. I do, like, I think he can be a core piece. What are your top 3 pieces on a championship team? The question is, you know, can they add a third piece here? And what would that piece look like? And what would that piece be? But, you know, look, the NBA is constantly changing. I think we sort of become prisoners of the moment. and believe that will always be a certain way and it's not. And, it's constantly changing, and things that may not be valued today will probably be valued again in a few years. You just kind of have to wait.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's, I guess that's kind of a circle of everything going on right now with Dallas sports, at least as it pertains to the two major talked about teams. But yeah, I think there's a lot to consider, and it's interesting, the dynamic between them. And there are ways in which they have similarities in that, like with regard to the heavy focus on them. Now the Mavericks are kind of starting to move into that, with Luka making them like a must-see attraction at this point. But it'll be interesting to see where they go from here, and if the Mavericks can actually cobble something together to make at least just give me a playoff series win. It's been so long. I mean, it's the same boat as the Cowboys. I was just talking about similarities. Like, just give me a series win. I'll be happy with that for this year. I've done my waiting.
Yeah, I think Cowboys are in a position now where you need more than one win for sure.
Oh yeah, Cowboys are different. For them, if they're not at least to the NFC Championship, I don't even want to hear about it. But yeah. Anyway, well, I appreciate you coming on here and everything. It's always good to talk with you, talk sports and everything. And we'll have to do it again sometime.
I appreciate you having me on, Darreck. I appreciate you, man. Keep grinding, keep doing what you're doing, man.
Absolutely. But that does it for the time here. If you guys haven't already, check out Ari's work. Give his show a listen on Sirius XM. Check out his Cowboys pregame, postgame as well with the fan. His work there is great. And I don't know if you're watching this on YouTube, like the video, share, comment, subscribe. I don't know, whatever works.
All that stuff.
Yeah, all that good stuff. Every now and then I start to default back into my Dallas prospect tagline, like send off, and then I'm like trail off and like I'm not on the right platform for that. Like I can only imagine. I would probably, like, if I was on like live radio or something, be it like, one of the stations here or like Sirius XM like you are, I feel like I would like hit autopilot going into the outro and accidentally plug my own platform. Like, oops, I'm gonna get in trouble for that. But
well, that's and when you're on all these different radio stations, you have to always make sure you're keeping which one you're on straight. That's always my biggest fear for sure.
Keep a big sign on the wall in front of you, like for what show you're on. Like, okay, yeah. But anyway, we'll do this again sometime. And for everyone else, until next time. I almost did it, literally, as we were just talking about it. Until next time, guys. Peace.